Hello, everybody, and welcome to our presentation, part 21 of our, this is the 21st presentation we've done on COVID this year. And it's a presentation of Sullivan and Comp. This is about the vaccines that are coming. I think they're coming today. They're on the trucks. And so we're here to talk about what's going on with vaccines. We have with us Dr. Eli Hendel, who is an epidemiologist, if I'm not mistaken.
Pulmonologist.
Pulmonologist?
Yeah.
Okay, good enough. You can switch to the next slide, doctor. Here's all of our pretty faces. You've gotten used to this by now. You got me, Mike Sullivan, and I'm the primary author of Sullivan on Comp, and the general managing partner of Michael Sullivan and Associates. And then we got Eric DeWams, who is the managing partner in charge of our employment law section at Michael Sullivan and Associates. Hi, Eric.
Hello, everybody again.
And then we got the pulmonologist, Dr. Eli Hendel. And doctor, this is the second time that we've done a webinar together.
Yeah, a lot has changed since the first time.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Shoot, maybe we should have made this longer. But I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Dr. Hendel will be doing the majority of this webinar. This is a slide that just shows who we are. You've seen it before. If you're listening to this, you're probably a subscriber to Sullivan on Comp. This is the Sullivan on Comp production, which means that I don't wear my defense attorney hat. I wear my neutral, inform the world of what the issues are hat. And that's what this production is. Now, normally Sullivan on Comp webinars only go out to Sullivan on Comp subscribers, but we decided to open this up to the world so the whole world can see it. And hopefully it'll be a benefit to everybody. We've done, as I said, this is our 21st webinar this year, and this and the next slide are a list of all the webinars we've done. If you're listening to this, you probably heard one before. As you can see here, there's a long list: developing medical landscape, then 1159, 685, and then last couple of weeks of the Cal-OSHA regulations. Boy, that was that last one was 2 hours. You're just asking questions. It's also complicated. It comes at us so fast. So hopefully we're going to help everybody get on board with what's going on. There's also our book, Navigating COVID-19. And this is another resource. We wanted to make sure that you knew this was available to you as a resource. If you're listening, just go to our website, sullivanattorneys.com, and you'll see all the webinars. And then you'll also see this book. And if you printed it out, it'd be over 300 pages long. We're adding to it almost every day. It's ebook. It's always up to date, and it tries to answer all questions about COVID in regards to California workers' comp and employment law. And damn, if I don't think we're really covering a lot of it. We're really trying to get everything. So you can look at this and use it as a resource, bookmark it. I think we last checked, we had close to 1,000 people a week, or maybe it was a month. A lot. Anyway, a lot of people looking at this and our webinars too. So these are resources available to you at the website below. But not today. Today, we are talking about the vaccines. The vaccines are coming, folks. I was looking like everyone else online for news. And it seems like there's an increase, these days, a rapid increase of COVID cases. We're up to 15 million cases, I think, in the United States, 300,000 deaths. And the pace of it, doctor, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the pace of it is increasing rapidly, all while the vaccines are coming. We have 2 companies and more on the way that have produced vaccines. The doctor's going to tell us all about the vaccines. People are concerned about it, that it went real fast, and is it safe? What are the details? What are the dangers? How's it going to be distributed? Who's going to get it first, and how long is it going to take? And in my mind, I'm an employer. I'm also in the industry, and I'm also a citizen of the world. And so I'm wondering, what's 2021 going to look like? How is this going to unfold? When are we going back to work? When can we go? When can me and the doctor and Eric all go back out to the discos? And socialize.
We don't call it disco anymore, Mike.
Oh, the discotheque.
The discotheque.
Yeah. And so, when's that all going to happen? So, I'm going to let Dr. Hendel run it through. What is, doctor, what are these vaccines? How do they work? What are the dangers? What are the risks? What are people thinking? Tell us all about it.
Yeah, well, to begin with, we had the most profound change in our world with something completely unexpected. And what followed is the most remarkable instrument to combat this significant pathogen. And yet, half of the world is skeptical about both. I think this is just part of the story, as important of the story as about COVID and the vaccine itself. And I think this statement that was made about 40 or 50 years ago by Isaac Asimov represents my feelings about this. So the first thing that we need to talk about is, what does a vaccine do? A vaccine does not protect you against the pathogen. A vaccine simply gets you ready by familiarizing yourself with the danger that is coming. Part of the problem that has been, and that was the cause of a lot of deaths at the beginning, is that we're all caught by surprise. And as we spoke about the last time, the reason people died was not because of the virus, but was because of the disarray and the response to the virus, what's called the cytokine storm. So this vaccine prepares you and makes your body create antibodies. So it is you who's going to fight the pathogen. It is the vaccine that prepares you. So how does it prepare you against COVID-19?
So doctor, just to make sure I understand, the vaccine doesn't actually fight the virus. It activates your body's defense system. So the virus, when it starts to get in there, can't spread. It just can't get in can't do anything in your body. Oh, wow. It's pretty amazing, huh?
Yeah. So your body has to produce antibodies that will target this particular virus. Now, we have been exposed to coronaviruses in the past. As I said before, there are 7 coronaviruses that have known to affect humans. The first 4 just cause a common cold. So we do have circulating antibodies against coronaviruses. And there is actually there are actually studies done that show that people who have been exposed to COVID for the first time did have some antibodies that did fight the COVID based on your exposure to coronaviruses from the previous. But nevertheless, we have the challenge is to produce an antibody that singles out COVID-19. So we have COVID-19 that looks like this, and all it is a RNA molecule surrounded by a capsid, so that has a C protein, and then it's surrounded by an envelope, which has an M protein. And what's unique to COVID-19 is these things here, that's called the spike protein, the S protein. That's what the COVID-19 needs to penetrate human cells. Remember, any virus cannot survive. In order to survive, they have to penetrate a host, a human host, or animals. Animals are the biggest reservoir of viruses in general. So the spike protein is what it needs to penetrate human cells. So having an antibody against this specific spike protein is a specific defense against this particular pathogen. And this is what these vaccines are being made to.
Doctor, first of all, I've been really excited about having you captive for us here today. There's so much information and misinformation out there. And, Mike and I have our specialties in our world, but this, interrelates with it. And there's so much, I don't know. So we're going to have a bunch of questions for you. So I apologize in advance for any stupid questions. But here they go. For the vaccine, how often do you have to get it? I mean, we get it, hopefully, pretty soon. And then is this a once a year thing? Do you always have the antibodies? How does this work?
There are going to be a lot of questions. And as I'm going to explain later, all we know is what the phase 3 trial demonstrated. And because it's a phase 3 trial and it's under emergency uses authorization, they are not subject to peer review. So there's a lot we don't know, only what is in the press release and only what is the Data Safety Monitoring Board has observed during this trial. So a lot of your questions have no answers.
Yep.
A lot of that remains to be seen. We're just prompted because of the urgency of the situation of regaining our society.
Yeah, a lot of educated guessing going on.
That's pretty scary. It's pretty scary. Yeah.
So this is the way this works. You're going to get an injection that does not have a virus, that has reconstituted mRNA. An mRNA is a message, normally that you get a message from the nucleus of every cell that has DNA, and RNA reads the message from the DNA and it goes out to the cell and instructs the cell what to do, what protein to make. Here, we are injecting human beings with mRNA that is produced in the laboratory. And this mRNA will penetrate cells. It's surrounded by this lipid layer that is right here. And this lipid layer is what requires them to be minus 70 degrees. So it won't disintegrate because mRNA is very fragile. So once the mRNA is in the human cells will produce this spike protein that the virus produces.
Will it be 70 degrees below?
Centigrade.
Yeah, will it be that cold when they inject it in us?
That I don't know.
That's gonna hurt.
Oh, it's transported with dry ice. And how is it thought? I do know that the shelf life is less than a day. So the minute they're transported and they're taken out of whatever the containers are, they have to be used. So
maybe they can
that's
cool
why
off
the
a little
distribution is going to be very important. They have to plan on who is going to take it and have people commit themselves to be on that particular day. Otherwise, it will be wasted vaccines.
Yeah.
So this RNA is injected and mRNA is injected, and the human cells make the spike protein. And it's the hope that the human host, once it has this protein in his system, will create antibodies against this protein. So that's a lot of ifs. First of all, you're depending on this RNA entering your cells and your cells making this protein exactly the way the protein is in the COVID virus. And then that your body makes antibodies that will not only hit this protein, but will hit the part of the protein that used to get into human cells. And I will describe that protein later. It's a lot of ifs. So what you asked before, what you predict, how every human is going to adapt to this, or what every individual immune system is going to respond to it, it's a big question mark. All we have is a little bit of data from the first trial. So the question is, who should get this first? And there's a lot of talk about healthcare workers. And then there is a question is there any value to demand that healthcare workers be vaccinated? Like any other employer, there is a question, an employer doesn't have the right to demand anything from any employee. However, healthcare workers have this pledge of non-maleficence or do no harm, which implies that they have to consider the safety of the patients before their own. So if they have any reservations about taking vaccines that are known to make the patient safe, they have to put those reservations aside, whether they're religious or otherwise, and they have to do whatever is safety for the patients. And the best example of that is the influenza shot, which is done every year. Hospitals do require that every employee be vaccinated for the flu, and that includes physicians who are on staff who are not employees of the hospital. And that's a major issue. Some physicians do not want to be vaccinated, and hospitals are saying if you don't get vaccinated, there won't be the sticker on your ID card, and you may not be allowed to come into the facilities. Some physicians don't go into the hospital, and now with telehealth being more prevalent, we have radiologists who work for large companies that are out of state, who do readings at night. We have neurologists who do monitoring of EEGs for brain surgery from distant areas. They're never going to set foot in the hospital. So they have a legitimate question. Why should I be tested for TB or be vaccinated for the flu? I'm never going to set foot in the hospital. So hospitals are required to obey the bylaws. So now they have to create a different category of you either have active privileges or courtesy privileges, or now there's going to have to be tele-privileges for a physician who is on staff, but he cannot set foot in the facility.
So are you telling me that like, I wasn't really aware of this, that doctors, everyone that works at a hospital has to get a flu vaccine. So if someone objects based on, say, religious grounds, then they just don't get to work at the hospital, and that's not a valid legal objection. Is that how it works?
That is correct.
And then what if they have like pathologies that may, I mean, let's say they have something, a medical condition, a comorbidity.
A medical contraindication is the only valid excuse.
Okay, but we don't know. Is there medical contraindications for the regular flu vaccine?
There are people who had major allergic reactions to certain vaccines. That has
we don't know about this one though, right? So we don't know about what
no, but the flu vaccine has changed a lot with the way they're made now. In the past, they were made out of yolk embryos, and some people had allergy to eggs. Oh. That has changed. But I have not encountered that people said for religious reasons. I've encountered people who just don't feel like taking it.
Yeah.
Or,
what if your employees, what if the people at the hospital said, look, we don't have enough data for me to feel confident that this won't hurt me. Is that how are hospitals and healthcare worker organizations going to handle that?
Are you talking about influenza or about COVID?
COVID.
This slide does not apply to COVID. I put this slide as an example of what's existing. How will that play out? That's for you guys, so you lawyers.
Yeah. We have some slides on the end about employers and vaccinations, but it's interesting, Eric. I didn't think we'd prepared to talk about like healthcare workers. It's interesting. I do want to say that over the weekend, I read that looks like they're predicting that first, like they're going out today, right? Or this week at least. And they're going first to old folks' homes and the people that work there and the people that reside there. And then next comes the healthcare workers and the frontline workers. And then next comes the comorbidities, people with comorbidities that are at greater risk. And that they think that, and they don't know, but they think it's going to take at least halfway through the year to get just through those people. So best guess, and we don't know, and they're pumping it out fast. Best guess, absent some unanticipated negative reaction physically to this vaccine by the population, if it all goes apace, it seems like it's going to take the rest of the year to really get enough of enough people inoculated so that we can sort of go back to normal in terms of regular gatherings socially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this morning, I already saw the first vaccines given to healthcare workers who volunteered to be the first.
Yeah.
That was, a big thing this morning on the news. So it's already, rolling out. And during this discussion, there's, a couple of paths. One is, what have we seen in the past for something that is FDA approved, like a flu vaccine? And, we try and work through that. And then we have this unique situation where this vaccine is only emergency use authorization approved.
That is the big if.
Right.
It'll be hard to demand anybody of something that is only emergency use authorization.
And the reason, I guess, doctor, is that it just hasn't been tested to the extent that something FDA approved generally.
This is only approved while the emergency exists. Once the emergency is lifted, all the vaccine makers has to go back to square one and get it approved by the regular channels. So yes, the sense that it will be, I don't think anybody's in a position to require anybody to get it because of that, because of its only emergency authorization use.
Even the healthcare workers, right? Like even the hospitals, they're not going to make people get this vaccine if they don't want to.
I do not foresee that, but you got to remember this vaccine prevents you from having a serious illness. there is no evidence to suggest that it prevents one from being a spreader.
Right.
There's a lot we don't know. This trial was an event-driven trial. Only the people who developed symptoms were tested. What we don't know is the other people who never developed symptoms, and among them are there asymptomatic carriers. So the purpose of the vaccine is not exactly to stop the spread. The purpose of the vaccine is to stop the serious illness among people, and with the thought that if you have enough of a population that have defenses and don't allow this virus to replicate, then the virus will die. And that's what herd immunity is.
So I was under the impression that, and I don't know why, just in my brain, I thought that if you got vaccinated, then you couldn't really even be a carrier. But that's not correct.
That we do not know. And they don't make that claim either.
Well, is that true of other types of vaccinations? I mean,
well, the Astra Zeneca one, they did make a statement, but they have not they prevent the infection. But they have not presented the final results. But
I mean, I wonder about vaccinations. Do they usually make someone not able to be a carrier? Generally, not for COVID, but just generally.
No, none of the Pfizer or the Moderna claim that it stops you from getting infected by the COVID virus. And another thing you got to remember is all the people who were tried were on the trial. They still had to wear masks and do the distancing. So all the results, the 90% effectiveness was with the present measures. So we still don't know what's going to happen if we stop all those measures of the people, if enough people get vaccinated and they stop and they go back to the regular lives.
Boy, you're really making me bummed out here, doctor. I thought we had a big solution that was going to fix everything and we knew it was going to be good.
I think that, yeah, I agree. And I think that's part of the misinformation that's out there. You know, that everybody thinks this is a magic, you know, solution that's going to be a cure-all for all these issues all at once. And we're we're not there yet, although this is an exciting day. It's not everything goes back to normal in 3 months.
The bottom line, most of the people are not afraid of the serious illness that may kill you. Mm-hmm. Most people are afraid of continuing like this with the isolation and want to get back to normal. People are afraid of losing their businesses. That's what all the anger is, unfortunately.
Well, not just that. I mean, us extroverts are clawing our eyes out because we like to be around people.
That's why we do so many webinars.
So we can see each other on Zoom, yeah.
So what do we know from the past of problems with vaccines that has been, and I think this is an important thing for us to revisit because as people are skeptical about the vaccine, let's see what they're basing it on. A lot has been said about Guillain-Barre. Guillain-Barre is a condition by which you make an antibody that attacks yourself. It's called autoimmune disease. And this affects the peripheral nervous system. And there are many, many causes of Guillain-Barre. There's about 3,000 to 6,000 cases a year. But the flu is a minority of cases. And yet influenza has been stuck with that blame that people use that as a reason why not to get the influenza vaccine. There are, however, cases of problems with vaccines, and these are the most famous ones. The 1998, there was this one vaccine for rotavirus that was associated with intussusception. That's a condition by which the bowels fold up on each other. And the CDC recommended that it be suspended. The other cases, they had a better look and they find no association with a link, like the hepatitis B associated with multiple sclerosis. And there was a meningococcal vaccine associated with Guillain-Barre. There was something really interesting in the H1N1 pandemic in England. They made this vaccine against the flu, and there were a few cases of narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is a rare disease that affects, contrary to what people believe, is not a disease that makes you desire to go to sleep. It's a disease that you have an impairment in ability to stay awake. It's not the same thing.
Actually, it's triple the rate among workers' comp practitioners.
Yeah, well, there is it is a potentially work-related condition when there's head trauma.
Oh,
And I've seen at least one case where that was a legitimate claim. So that raised the questions of whether narcolepsy is an autoimmune condition with antibodies that hit that part of the brain that produces orexin, which is a hormone that keeps you awake. However, the CDC found no links with the flu vaccines and narcolepsy. Nevertheless, the studies of narcolepsy in general as an autoimmune disease continues. But these were the biggest cases that people, and they were such a minority considering the millions of people get vaccinated every year. This is very little.
Well, it looks like what you just showed us, there was only one instance where it seemed like it was a valid issue with
the rotavirus
vaccination causing. I didn't understand the Guillain-Barre. I think I pronounced that wrong.
Guillain-Barre.
In that case, was the vaccine causing that?
They went back and they found no link. And what they do is that they do this thing called a meta-analysis. Meta-analysis, and when you take a lot of different studies and you take all the data together and you add all the variables, and then you see if there was a quick significant difference between one and the other.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. My dad actually had Guillain-Barre, and he does not get the flu vaccine because of it, and he is also told by his doctors not to the COVID-19 vaccine because of it. And whether or not that's being over precautious, that's the advice he's been getting.
Yeah. Well,
it doesn't seem like there's a lot of evidence from what you're showing us for a link between getting a vaccine and getting sick.
And this is the most famous or infamous example. This was a study published in England years ago by this neurologist called Andrew Wakefield, in which he studied 12 children who took the MMR vaccine, that's the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, and found an association with enterocolitis and developmental disorder, which is interpreted as an autism. And that was based on a lot of it on what the parents were saying. It was later learned that the data was collected in a way that was more suggestive. And there's a lot was not disclosed, including the fact that these parents were part of a class action lawsuit against the company that made the vaccine. And that this Dr. Wakefield was actually a paid expert witness for this law firm, paid large amount of money per hour. So he did not disclose that, the conflict of interest. The data was found to be faulty. And in the end, I think the doctor lost his license to practice medicine in England. And the Lancet retracted that article. Nevertheless, that rumor of MMR causing autism is still alive and pretty good. And that is tragic because measles is 9 times more infective than COVID. If you consider that number, the R0, or the R0, we were in LA, we started at 3.2. That means one person will infect 3 people and so forth. And we got down to 1. 1 is a good infectivity number. Below 1, the pathogen will disappear. We stayed like that until recently. I think now we're 1.6 or 1.8. Well, measles is 9.0. It's 9 times more infective. So it is tragic if some parents choose to have their kids not vaccinated for MMR. It all came from this very infamous article. But that's for you to know what attorneys can do when they have.
Hold on now. That was a doctor. That guy there.
That's plaintiff's attorneys we're talking about.
Yeah, it's plaintiff's attorneys.
Well, I mean, the real guilt is a failure to disclose. There's nothing wrong with an attorney to have a class action lawsuit, but the doctor should have disclosed that he was doing this on behalf of the attorney, and the Lancet would have rejected such thing because these journals are very difficult to get published. They have a 90% rejection rate. So there was less honesty in reporting. But we're stuck with that. And part of that follows us till today. So what is the emergency use authorization? And I'm apologizing for the way the slide is written. And the use comes before authorization, the EUA. This came from this act that was written before in 2013, and this was in preparedness for biological warfare, for actually bioterrorism. And has been used in the past primarily in the military, when the military was going to go into certain places, when they were going to expect it to encounter some things like anthrax. And there were certain remedies that were not yet approved. So they lowered the standards for approval just for specific situations. So now, because of COVID was so unusual and the whole society was in the same boat, it was modified to be applied to COVID. The important thing is that this is the first time that this vehicle is used for such a large world population. And by the way, we're not the only ones. Every country has their own version of the FDA and their own version for having the mechanism to have something approved. And I'm sure they have their own way to get around it with the PrEP Act. When a pharmaceutical develops a new medicine, they not only have to apply to the FDA, they have to go to every country and their own versions. As you can imagine, they'll prioritize the country when there's a lot more to gain. In America is still the country where they make more money. So they gear all their studies to pass the FDA, and they use that to be approved in other countries. The other thing as I said before, the emergency use authorization does not constitute approval in the full statutory meaning. It's only authorizes during the state of emergency. When that state of emergency will be lifted, this approval goes away, and they have to go through the standard measures.
Now, do you know, Doctor, are they going through the standard measures now? That's not on pause. They're doing that anyway, right?
Well, the standards are different. So the first phase 3 trials were, I don't think these phase 3 trials will be good enough for the standard authorization. They have to meet a higher standard.
So he's saying that, but they're going to continue. They're going to go now do the higher.
Oh,
standard.
I'm sure.
Yeah, that's not on pause.
Like you said, it's only good while there's an emergency.
And not only that, the interesting part about this is that unlike other situations where the maker is in full control before it comes to through the standard channels, here it's already out, so they lose all control. There's going to be other scientists who are going to look at data. They're going to take people who have gotten the vaccinations, and they're going to collect their own data and publish their own papers. So these companies, Pfizer and Moderna, are going to lose control of all the data. So then when they apply, they're going to have to deal with stuff that they were not prepared to deal with before, which usually does not happen. Usually when a drug company has a drug and they apply for a standard use, they go through their own study and they take the easiest way. In fact, when I read the medical letter, which is the periodical of the new medications, most of these drugs are non-inferiority trials, which means all they prove they're just as good as the next guy. So now with this, a lot of people are going to be looking at data, so they're going to have to deal with all this data when they're going to want approval. The other part is that you're going to have millions of healthy individuals who will be vaccinated with a vaccine that was never tested before. In addition to the fact that this technology of fabricating an mRNA that will make your body to build a protein that will then trigger your immune system, build an antibody, this is totally new. And this is very exciting because if it works, the potential is to create a lot of new vehicles where the immune system plays a part. Cancer, for example. The new trend of treating cancer is targeted therapy. When you create an antibody that will inhibit a receptor that is specific for certain types of cancers. Pathology reports now are so complicated because they test for so many gene mutations in each one with their own receptor that they build the whole, what they call biological treatment, immunological treatments. So they target the bad cells, sparing the good cells, which, unlike chemotherapy, that kills all the cells. So potentially the thought that you can fabricate an mRNA that will make your body produce the protein that you want antibody against, it's a very important thing. And the fact that it happened in such a short period of time, I think is very incredible. Pfizer, it was BioNTech who developed this technology. Moderna started earlier this year. They were actually partnering with China, and they were using the first SARS to work. And BioNTech got the other technology, and that's why they partnered with Pfizer. I believe they just got sold for $2.7 billion. So that technology is very important. The other thing that people ask, they don't know, they don't trust Pfizer, they don't trust pharmaceuticals because they lied in the past. And it's true, Pfizer had paid a penalty for not lying, but saying things that didn't tell the whole story. And I will come clean. I have been a paid speaker for Pfizer in the past. It was one drug called Zyvox, linezolid, which was an antibiotic to treat MRSA. And it was exciting because the only option was vancomycin, and that was oral, and Zyvox was oral. So they claimed that they had more levels in the alveolar tissue, which when you treat pneumonia, it's a good thing to have. What they didn't show is that the fact that there's more in the alveolar tissue, it's more effective in treating pneumonia. And because of that, they were fined, I believe, $2 billion. So anyway, the important thing that people should know is that these phase 3 trials were monitored by something called the Data Safety Monitoring Board. So all the side effects, all the result, the blinding code, the instrument in which nobody knows who gets the real thing and who gets placebo, that code is only known by this party, which is a third party, not in control of Pfizer. So they're not in control of the data. Once the data was presented last week to the FDA, that was accurate data as shown by this board. So that's in answer to the question of the people who just don't trust pharmaceutical companies.
Now, doctor, for the EUA standards, am I correct that this has not been tested for pregnant women or women who are trying to get pregnant?
They're not being tested in pregnant women. They're not being tested in people under 16. And I'll go further. I've heard that the Moderna study did not have enough old people. And that's a very big question.
Right.
Because they not only have poor immunity, but they can also have a dangerously exaggerated immunity. And I'm more worried about, I'm not as worried about this vaccine being sent to all the healthcare workers. I'm more worried about the other one that you mentioned, the nursing home population. Nursing home is a very dangerous place to be these days.
Yeah.
And that's
largely our ground zero when this all broke out.
And by the way, the vote last week was not unanimous. That FDA expert panel was 17-4 with one abstention. And the 4 people who voted against it was precisely because there was not enough data for 16 and 17 years old. Pfizer got the approval for anybody above the age of 16. I don't know if they would apply for above 18. Those 4 people would have voted for it, but for the record, there are questions about the individuals who are young.
What about, you mentioned that when they did the third trials, they had safety protocols, distancing, masks, and all that. In my head, I had the idea that they had a whole bunch of people who got exposed to the virus and then had the vaccine and they were okay. So what does this really even tell us if we don't even know if there was exposure after inoculation?
Well, I think I have let me answer.
I don't know how it works.
Yeah, let me answer to you about the details of the study a little later because I have a slide.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The first thing I wanted to tell you is like, what are the different ways of making a vaccine? And you have a virus that doesn't cause disease. But this virus still replicates. And an example of that was the polio virus, the polio vaccine. The other one is having a virus that has the information similar to COVID, but this virus does not replicate, so it cannot cause disease. And this is the one that the Astra Zeneca vaccine is. They use a chimpanzee adenovirus, and they give him the characteristics of the COVID vaccine. So theoretically, you have a virus injected into yourself. And Pfizer and Moderna have this brand new technology where they actually inject the message, the mRNA that produces the protein that will make you develop antibody against. And
so there's little concern that, because that was my first thought too. I mean, people get a flu vaccine and sometimes they come down with symptoms, you know, of the flu.
Yes.
Right? But with this technology, that's not really what the concern is going to be, because they're not being injected with the actual virus.
That is correct.
Okay.
But there are going to be effects, but not because of the virus. The effects will be because of your own immunity, which is a big question mark. Everybody's immunity is different. And this is what they did. The 46,000 was the PFIZER-BioNTech. It's called the BNT162b2. The other one is called the mRNA 1273. And it was event-driven. So all of this were given the vaccine. Nobody knows who got the real thing, who got the placebo. And only those who complained of symptoms were tested for COVID. And their goal was to get at least 150, 170. And they got their 170. And out of those who tested positive, 95% were the ones who got placebo versus 5% got that.
Oh, I see.
But that's all what 95% means. It doesn't mean, like people think, that half of 43,000 people got a vaccine and never got sick. We don't know that.
I see. It's just the ones that got sick, 95% of them had a placebo.
Yeah. And
no, that's pretty telling, I think.
And not only that, the FDA standard was 50%. All they had to show was 50%. So even then, what happened to the other 43,000 people? That's a big question.
Well, they just never got exposed, or maybe they just never had symptoms.
Right. And the other thing is that the whole population was still went under the same precautions. To give you an example how vaccines are followed, the FDA only required monitoring for 2 months. And why 2 months? Because the most famous examples of vaccines that had problems, like the other slide that I showed you, they all happened within 6 weeks. So when you don't have major problems within 2 months, the FDA considers that safe. By the way, the Astra Zeneca had one serious problem. One patient was transverse myelitis, which stopped the whole trial because nobody knew who he got. Only one third party had the monitoring, the unblinding code. And it was 2 weeks later that was learned that person took placebo. So that's what it took. It stopped the whole thing in its tracks.
Wow. So, I mean, gee, now I get the sudden urge to wait 3 months before I get vaccinated.
Yeah. I guess this talk educates some people to something.
Well, I think it's such an important reason why we have all this information first before Mike and I get into what employers do.
Absolutely.
Because the news of this, and I can't tell you how often employers are, ready to pull the trigger now. Everybody gets it. You have to have it. Can't come in without it. Type of mentality. And I think it's important that we educate ourselves on what the reality of an EAU or EUA is in real time in January, February, March. Makes a big difference to me too.
This is to show you an example. The latest vaccine to be approved is the shingles vaccine. The trials were observed for over 3 years. I myself had the Shingrix, and let me tell you, the second shot was not a walk in the park. and my wife, who's much healthier than I am, she reacted not much worse than that. And the reason is because they have something called an adjuvant, some other substance that they add to it to stir up the immune system even more. So those immune reactions can be quite dramatic. We don't know that based on what we know now for this COVID vaccine. This is what we do know. It's not a walk in the park. We do know one person almost fainted. He went on urgent care. All of these are reported by this Data Safety Monitoring Board. It was enough to make the FDA concerned. But one thing that they all agreed when they were interviewed, those people who had the side effects, you should take a day off from work when you get the vaccine. Not like other vaccines. I went to work when I took the Shingrix vaccine, or everybody goes to work with the flu. This one, they all said you should assume that you're going to have something.
Wow, Eric, I can see the wheels, the legal wheels turning in your head about
you can't see us right now, but the stress in my face.
Yeah, I'm going to run a day off work when you get a vaccine. And then now, of course, the employer has sanctioned the vaccine.
Yep.
Yeah. And like you said, you're not being vaccinated with a virus. You're not being vaccinated with something that causes disease. All these side effects are a reflection that you're stirring up the immune system to work overtime to get a response. Some people are prepared for that. Some people are not. Some people's immune system will mount such a robust response that you're going to get a lot of side effects, a lot of innocent bystanders in your own body, so to speak. Wow. This is the Astra Zeneca. The interesting thing about the Astra Zeneca, they claim a 70% efficacy. What does that mean?
Well, what is AstraZeneca? I'm sorry.
The AstraZeneca is the one that they make the virus out of, the vaccine out of a virus that doesn't replicate. And this adenovirus is injected into your body, and that generates the immunity. Now, first of all, I have to tell you,
I see. The last slide was about the Pfizer,
right?
And this one's the second possible vaccine.
Yeah, the Pfizer and Moderna are the first two that work by the mRNA. This works by the virus.
This is the third. This is the third one.
This is the third one.
Oh.
The one thing I forgot to tell you, both of these vaccines are giving in 2 doses for a reason. If you remember the last time we spoke, I showed you this slide that they measured those antibodies on people after getting a vaccination, after getting exposure. And these antibodies, the IgG antibody specifically, goes down after 5 to 6 weeks. So then they had the re-exposure or a booster, and there's a much higher response. So based on that is why you get those 2 vaccines. You get the first one to at least familiarize your immune system that this thing is foreign. So they make these antibodies, and these antibodies go down after 5 weeks. And then 3 weeks later, you get another booster with another reminder, this thing is bad. So then you get a much more robust response. And those antibodies are supposed to last longer. How long? We do not know. Did they measure that in the phase 3 trials? We do not know. Probably they did not.
Well, I mean, I'm used to getting vaccinated and thinking that you're vaccinated, get them when you're a kid and then you are done. Isn't that usually the case with vaccinations?
Some of those will give you lifelong immunity. Some of them do not. Tetanus, you still got to get a booster.
Yeah, those are no fun to get a tetanus shot. I got one a few years ago.
But the interesting thing about AstraZeneca is that they had certain dosage, and you give one dosage on first week, and you get another dosage on third week, and they had a efficacy of only 62%. And then they made a mistake, and some group got a half a dose on the first vaccine and a full dose on the second 3 weeks later, and these guys were 90%. So based on that, they got an average efficacy of 70%. To point to you that we are approving vaccines where the right dosage is come by an error. And it's better, more efficacious when you give a half a dose on the first time. Nobody knew that at the beginning. So let's talk about antibodies. I think this is important.
Well, I'm sorry, but can you go back to Astra?
Yeah.
Are they distributing that?
No, they're not approved yet.
Okay. So this is coming, but it doesn't
They,
look like
they are not going to be left behind. AstraZeneca is a big company, and they're partners with Oxford. And it surprised me that England has reserved so many millions of the Pfizer vaccine when they have their own homegrown Oxford University participating with AstraZeneca.
Well, AstraZeneca, it doesn't look like it's as efficacious. So why would anybody want it?
Yeah, like I said, the standard is you got to beat 50%, and it is 90% efficacy when you give half a dose on the first time.
Okay.
And like I said, they found that out by error. So this is the important part. What are the antibodies? Now, we talked about you stirring your immune system to create antibodies, and you create those antibodies, and you may have the side effects from the antibodies. But we haven't talked about those antibodies. Ordinarily, a protein is just a straight line of amino acids, but that's not what, this is what the S protein looks like. It's like a bunch of, it's a long line, but it's like spaghetti, and it's a whole glob of chain of amino acids. So you can have antibodies against every different part that shows a side chain of the amino acid. So you're going to have antibodies against different parts of the protein. The important part is this part in red, and that's called the receptor binding domain, or the RBD that they talk about a lot. That is the part that the protein latches onto the human cell to penetrate. So if you can't have antibodies against the RBD, those are called the neutralizing antibodies. So it's not only important for you to make antibodies or how many antibodies, it's important that you make neutralizing antibodies that will stop this virus from entering your cells. Because if you make antibodies that don't stop the virus and allow this virus to penetrate, you have not accomplished anything. And I hate to tell you, but there's some bad news coming into the next slide. These other antibodies that are called binding antibodies that bind into the protein but doesn't neutralize, doesn't stop the virus from penetrating, they can do this. Have you ever heard of ADE, that term being used?
Nope.
It's called antibody-dependent enhancement. This is when antibodies into your body latch onto the pathogen and actually guide it to the most susceptible cells, and also fools your immune system, your cells, your lymphocytes, your killer cells, that this guy is taken care of even though he's not. So it actually makes matters worse. And we have seen that example with the dengue vaccine. What will happen with COVID? How many people will develop neutralizing antibodies? How many people will develop binding antibodies? And out of those, who will get the ADE is a big question mark. So like you said at the beginning, there's a lot we don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe you are
telling me, the more I'm scared.
Yeah,
well, wait a minute. I mean, is this going to happen, or I don't get it? Why?
Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Could this happen with the vaccines?
It happens with the dengue vaccine.
Okay, so then it'd be Planet of the Apes, right?
It happened that people who took the vaccine did worse because antibodies actually help the virus penetrate your cells.
Well, when did that happen in the COVID trials?
I don't remember how many years ago. That's the thing. I can look it up, but that was the best example of ADE. ADE is something that scientists are talking a lot about with all of these vaccines.
Well, what are the chances of this happening? This is really scary. Okay, so what are we telling people here? Is this going to happen? What are the chances of it happening? Is there any indication it might happen with Corona?
You know, if this trial that involved 38,000 people, 43,000 people, I have a lot of questions about this that I would like to ask in this trial if it was done for the sake of getting information. Did anybody measure antibodies on all the people who were injected? And out of those antibodies, how long do they last? How many of them developed the neutralizing antibodies? Were there any difference in the characteristics based on age, based on ethnicity, based on comorbidities, such as diabetes or other conditions that people have that affect their immunity, or medications that people take that affect their immunity? Remember, we're going to be rolling this to millions of people with a lot of different conditions. So we don't have the answers to a lot of your questions. Many of these will have to answer, will be able to answer who will get this AD.
Well, I'm going to feel better by just ignoring this.
Well, so this information you're talking about, Doctor, the Moderna and Pfizer, they haven't made those answers available to us. That data has not been released.
If they check for it, remember,
they might even not check for these types of things.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's take the other extreme. Some people ask, what if I take 2 vaccines? And these are the 4 scenarios. I don't think there is any argument in favor of getting 2 different vaccines. You're not twice as safe. You're just going to be having the chance of having more of consequences of too many antibodies, specifically autoimmune disease. Autoimmune diseases with antibodies attack yourself, such as Guillain-Barre. And this is, as I said, the people who never complain of symptoms, who never tested. How many of those, were there any of those who actually tested positive for COVID, but they didn't develop symptoms? Are they asymptomatic carriers? What a wonderful opportunity to have 43,000, at least half of 43,000 people, and see what antibody response they have and break it out into different. I am sure once a lot of people are inoculated, many scientists will start collecting people. I will not be surprised, people will be offering money to participate in the study. If you gotten the vaccine, we offer you money just to study to check your blood every so often, and to check your symptoms. I'm sure a lot of people will participate, and all of this will be out of the control of the Pfizer company.
Okay.
And this is my last slide to give you an indication why they did not check for things. Every lawyer who has a cause or a client knows never to ask a question unless you know the answer. You're only going to ask the question when the answer is going to help your cause. Well, a true scientist is supposed to look at the existing data of a subject, find something that is not being asked, check for most of the variables until he gets an answer to something, and it still gets critiqued. It's something called peer review, something which was not done with this phase 3 trials, and that leaves questions for more studies. That's what a true scientist does. However, a phase 3 trial, you do not want things that you don't want to hear, that you're not prepared for. You do it for one purpose, for a multi-billion-dollar investment to get that approved. So you don't ask a question unless you know the answer.
Well, even attorneys aren't that bad, because I'm a trial attorney and I don't ask a question I don't know the answer to at trial on cross. But even in discovery, I ask questions I don't know the answer to, so I know what the weaknesses are. And even this phase 3, it looks like they don't ask the questions because they don't want to know at that point.
Well, looks like we're doing phase 4 at the old folks' home.
Yeah.
I get the feeling I'm getting you more convinced that you want to have the healthcare workers, you want to see how they do before you do it. You want to have them experiment.
Well, I'm just absorbing what I'm seeing, which is that the reality is that there's risk to this vaccination because of how fast it went through the system. And it's going to take a few months for us to see what does and doesn't manifest before we really know what we got. And the people that are getting the vaccinations, while it's probably less risky than being exposed to COVID, they are undertaking a risk.
Yep.
Now, speaking for myself, being a healthcare worker who goes into the ICU, although not as frequently, I will say this. I am a big proponent of frontline workers to get the vaccine. Why? Because they have no choice. They're constantly exposed. And if at least they have a protection of not getting this onerous disease and condition and respiratory failure, that extra protection besides just the masks and the shields and the gowns, they should. And if you ask me, out of all the healthcare workers, who should be number one on the line of the list and who has the most exposure, I'll surprise you. It's not doctors, it's not nurses, it's respiratory therapists. I just finished my weekend on call in 2 hospitals. One of them had 90, the other one had 47 patients. They're all in a closed rooms. Well, the respiratory therapists go into each room several times a day. They give treatments that make them cough. They go into the ventilator to make the changes. They are the one with the highest risk. And then they are the people in the emergency room who see perfect strangers who you don't know who's positive and who is not. So I do believe they should come first.
Agreed.
Okay, well, fair enough. In our last few minutes, let's turn to Eric and talk a little bit about what does it mean to be an employer in this environment. Eric, I mean, you and I are figuring out for the firm and for our clients, and I think we're hearing that the employer can't require a vaccination right now and shouldn't even think about it until such time as the further definitive tests are done.
Yeah, that's really the final conclusion. We talked about, putting this presentation on, and there's going to be a lot of questions about what should happen in this case. And we're talking about something that is unprecedented. It is emergency use authorization. And what I'm going to talk about real quick is vaccines in general and what generally an employer can do. And then we apply this unique, never before situation where we're in a mass distribution of emergency use vaccines that, as we've seen from all these other slides, has not been tested to the extent of a measles vaccine or a flu vaccine. So generally, if the question is just, can an employer require a generally approved tested vaccine? And the answer is generally, there's a qualified yes, you can. And we've seen that with flu vaccines. And the reason is the employers have an obligation to keep the work site safe. Now, so generally you can do that. And there's some guidance out there from the Equal Opportunity Commission that came out about 2008 when they rolled out a preparedness plan. And generally what they said is they said they didn't specifically say you cannot do it. They said the better idea behind this is suggest a vaccine, but if you're going to require it, there's some caveats to that. You can't require it if somebody who has a pre-existing disability or mental condition that cannot have these types of vaccines, right? So under the ADA and FEHA, you can't require it of them. You have to make a reasonable accommodation. And they also outlined religious discrimination issues. If there's a religious reason for not taking this vaccine, that has to be taken into account as well. Now, that was actually tested a few years ago in the healthcare industry, where a nurse was saying that they didn't want to take the vaccine because they were vegan, and they considered that a religion. The court says, although religious exception can apply, veganism is not a religion, so no. And so there's these precursor cases that say once this is tested for the purposes of preventing a direct threat, employers likely will. But right now we're not there. Right now this is just rolling out. And do you want to mandate this of your employees? Probably not. My clients, what they're doing is encouraging their employees to look into vaccinations, not requiring it. Some have even been thinking about giving some incentives like bonuses to people who actually go out and do that in the next 6 months. There's lots of creative ways of trying to do this without saying you can't come to the office unless you have it. Especially now that we know just because you're vaccinated doesn't mean you don't carry it and bring it into the office. right now, and so that is something to take into consideration.
Okay.
So what do we have on this one?
After the measles outbreak, the New York became the 5th state after California.
Right. All 44 states allow a religious exemption. And this is measles that is so infective. And I believe it's really tragic that babies and children not be given the MMR based on some thoughts of the parents that I personally consider to be child abuse or child neglect. But yet only 5 states require all the children to be vaccinated except from medical contraindication, not a religious. Minnesota allows even a broader exemption, just personal belief, doesn't have to be religious.
Yeah, and actually in California, there was a bill a few years ago that was challenged on 10 different vaccines required of children, and it was upheld that they're required regardless of religious affiliation.
Well, I'll tell you, in workers' comp land, if we go to the next slide, there's case law that holds that if there's a vaccination that's done at the request or for the benefit of the employer, I have 2 cases on it here, then that vaccination, if it causes a problem, a medical problem, it's a work-related injury. And, Eric, I don't know if you agree with me, but what I'm thinking now is if I'm an employer, I'm not going to encourage people to get a vaccination. I'm not going to say, we encourage you to go get a vaccination. I think I'd rather say, you know what? The vaccinations are out. You need to make your own judgment as to whether or not you think it's a good idea for you, and you should do it in consultation with your physician. And whatever you decide as an employer, that's your decision. That might be the way to go.
I think that is, I 100% agree. That is the most conservative approach, especially after everything we've learned.
That we just heard, yeah. Next slide, Doctor.
Even encouraging it sounds a little scary to me.
Yeah, I know. It's not just that you might get a workers' comp, but look, what if this stuff goes south? It's every indication that it won't. I mean, I think, Doctor, are you going to get the vaccination?
Oh, I'm going to take it. Yes.
Yeah. I think I would too, it's risky to take corona. The testing looks good. There's a lot of negative possibles.
And I'm exposed to sick people all the time.
Yeah.
And
so there's a lot of risks just with that too. So I'm thinking, there's a lot of questions that Eric, you and I came up with before we think, well, should an employer assist in scheduling exams or give people time off? We just learned that
you should take a day
you
off.
Might get sick, right? And of course, if you give them time off, then now you're, as the employer, saying, hey, you're sanctioning it, right? It probably becomes a workers' comp issue. What about requiring vaccinations of people that are coming to your workplace, like vendors, on-site contractors, clients? What about like restaurants? Could restaurant require to show vaccination? It doesn't really make much sense because you can still be a carrier, as we've learned, but they may say, well, we just want to make sure that we're providing the safest possible environment so we don't get sued. If we don't require vaccinations and you get COVID at a restaurant, can we get sued?
Yep.
I think the answer probably is no in the present environment. Well, shoot, we're still shut down for 6 months as it is. So,
yeah. And
but I think,
go ahead.
I think I think we're going to probably say, as for now, for the next few months, and we'll do more webinars, folks, but it's up to everybody whether they want to do it or not.
Yeah.
I think it's probably worth the risk. I'll probably do it. As time goes on, it'll be less and less risky, but for employers and business purposes, we're not encouraging or demanding or requiring.
Yeah, I think that's right now the best advice for the next few months. And you don't know what's going to roll out for guidance from the EEOC and OSHA. Because remember, we were pretty surprised when they told us, a month into the pandemic that it was okay to start taking, temperatures and the kinds of things you normally couldn't do before that. So there might be guidance that comes out that surprises us in the next month or two, and it wouldn't surprise me.
Well, look, if that's going to happen, we're in the Wild West, and Eric, these guidance comes out and laws get passed, and you and I are jumping on webinars every week, it seems like, or every other week, and we're going to be doing that over the next few months. But it's good to know what we're facing now, And I think it's good to know that as employers, no real action is required or sought.
Yep. And I really appreciate, I learned a lot.
What's that, Eric?
I learned a lot just hearing the doctor today. So it's
okay. I think we went a little bit over our time, but I think it was well worth it. Boy, super informative. I really appreciate both of you coming on. Eric, thanks for your insight, and Dr. Hendel, thanks. This is really informative and enlightening.
I think contact. Six months from now, we should be looking at more data.
I agree. I think 2 months from now we will.
Exactly.
Right? Anyway, as we go along, here's our contact information. If you have any questions or comments, you want to talk to us, you can reach us here. But with that, I'm going to say thanks for coming, Eric and Dr. Hendel, and thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you on the next one.